Ethan Ward had driven powerful people through rainstorms, scandals, boardroom betrayals, and late-night breakdowns. But nothing prepared him for the moment a drunk CEO's clutch fell open in the back of his car and a dead woman's secret stared back at him. It was 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, the coastal highway glowing gold beneath the low sun, and Vivienne Sterling, the untouchable CEO of Sterling Group, was slumped against the leather seat behind him after a 5-hour shareholder brunch. Her perfect hair undone, her breath warm with wine, whispering one word over and over like a prayer. Mama. Ethan kept his eyes on the road until the car stopped at a red light. Then her silver clutch slid from her lap, hit the floor mat, and spilled its contents near his polished shoe. Lipstick, a hotel key, a folded receipt, and one black and white photograph. Ethan picked it up without thinking, and the world inside him stopped. The young woman in the picture was not Vivienne. It was not her mother as he knew her from newspaper portraits. It was the same face he had seen every night for 10 years on the bedside table of his late wife, Clara. Same coat, same porch, same dark stain in the upper right corner. The same impossible photograph Clara had carried to her grave without ever knowing who the woman was. The light turned green. Cars honked behind him. Ethan did not move. In the back seat, Vivienne murmured again, Mama, and suddenly the quiet chauffeur, the widowed single father, the man everyone at Sterling Group treated like furniture, understood one terrifying truth. He had not been driving a CEO for 3 years by coincidence. He had been sitting inches away from the family that had erased his wife. Ethan Ward did not believe in coincidence anymore. He had stopped believing in it years ago. First, in the quiet rooms of federal investigations where every missing dollar had a signature, every shell company had a purpose, and every lie left a shadow if a man knew where to look. Later, after Clara died, he stopped believing in gentler coincidences too. The song that played in a grocery store on her birthday, the scent of her shampoo in a crowded hallway, the way their daughter Nora sometimes tilted her head exactly like her mother when she was thinking. Those things were not messages from the universe. They were wounds remembering where they had been made. But the photograph in Vivienne Sterling's clutch was different. That was not memory. That was evidence. Ethan drove the black Sterling Group town car beneath a canopy of late-afternoon light, both hands steady on the wheel, his face arranged into the neutral expression people expected from a professional driver. Behind him, Vivienne Sterling slept badly against the leather seat, her head turned toward the window, one hand limp beside the open clutch. She was 35, perhaps 36, though power made her seem older in public, and exhaustion made her seem younger now. In boardrooms, she was known for a voice that could silence men twice her age, and a gaze that turned excuses into resignations. In the back of his car, with wine on her breath and one broken word slipping from her mouth, she looked less like a CEO than a daughter who had spent too long trying not to need anyone. Mama, she whispered again. Ethan's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then back to the road. The black and white photograph lay hidden inside the pocket of his coat, but he could feel it there as surely as if it were burning through the fabric. He had not meant to take it. That was the first lie, he told himself. He had picked it up at the red light, seen the face, and made a decision before his conscience could catch up. He should have placed it back in her clutch. He should have driven to the hotel, opened her door, handed it to her, and asked the question like an honest man. But the face in that photo belonged to the mystery Clara had carried silently through their marriage. The unknown woman she had kept beside her bed for 10 years. The face she had looked at on the nights when she thought Ethan was asleep. Clara had once told him she did not know why the photo mattered. I just feel like she belongs somewhere in me, she had said, laughing softly because it sounded foolish. Ethan had not laughed. He had kissed her forehead and told her that some questions took time. They had both believed they had more of it. At 2:47, he turned beneath the stone arch of Camden Harbor Inn, where Vivienne kept a private suite whenever Sterling Group business brought her north. The valet stepped forward, but Ethan lifted one hand to stop him. He had driven Vivienne for 3 years. He knew which moments required efficiency, which required discretion, and which required the careful removal of witnesses. He parked beneath the porte-cochere, killed the engine, and stepped out into the salt-edged air. The harbor glittered beyond the hotel lawn. Guests in linen jackets laughed near the entrance, unaware that the woman who signed paychecks for half the region was asleep in the back of a car with a secret missing from her purse. Ethan opened the rear door. "Ms. Sterling," he said quietly. Vivienne stirred her lashes, lifting with visible effort. For a second, she looked at him without recognition. Then the mask returned, incomplete but familiar. "Pemberton," she murmured, using the surname she had called him by since his first week on the job, even though his name was not Pemberton, but Ward. The mistake had begun with a rushed assistant and a mislabeled driver assignment. Ethan had corrected it once mildly, and Vivienne had been too distracted to notice. After that, he had let it remain. In 3 years, she had spoken to him thousands of times and never truly addressed him. He had once found it convenient. Now it felt like another locked door. "We're at the inn, ma'am," he said. She looked down at her open clutch, then away, too tired to inspect it. The bellhop arrived with her key. Ethan helped her from the car with one hand beneath her elbow, neither too intimate nor too distant, the practiced balance of service. She swayed once in the elevator and he steadied her. Her perfume was faint beneath the wine, expensive and cold, but under it there was something human: stress, fatigue, fear. At the suite door, she paused with her hand on the frame. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time all afternoon, her voice was clear. "Get some rest, Ms. Sterling." She looked as if she might say more, but the moment passed. The door closed. Ethan stood in the corridor for 3 seconds longer than necessary, listening to the soft click of the lock, feeling the photograph against his chest. Then he went back down to the car and drove away by the inland road, because the coastal route had too many open views, and he did not want the ocean watching him think. By 4:30, he was at June Miller's small yellow house on Waverly Street, where Nora spent afternoons when his schedule ran late. Nora came out with her backpack slipping from one shoulder and a bandage wrapped dramatically around her thumb. "Paper cut," she announced before he could ask, holding it up like a war injury. Ethan crouched and kissed the bandage. "Does the paper look worse?" Nora considered this seriously. "It was a worksheet, so I think it deserved it." June laughed from the doorway. Ethan thanked her, took Nora's backpack, and walked his daughter to the truck he used when he was not driving Sterling executives in polished silence. Nora was 7 years old, narrow-shouldered, bright-eyed, and already more observant than Ethan knew what to do with. She had Clara's mouth, Clara's patience with pencils, and Clara's strange habit of drawing places she had never seen, as if remembering them from another life. On the drive home, she told him about the worksheet a classmate who had eaten glue by accident and a map she was making of an island with 3 dangerous cliffs and 1 emotionally suspicious lighthouse. Ethan nodded in the right places. He smiled when expected. He asked questions because good fathers asked questions. But beneath every ordinary word, the photograph waited. Their cottage sat above a narrow strip of water outside Camden. Small and weathered with gray shingles, a porch that needed repair, and a kitchen window that turned gold at sunset. Ethan had bought it after leaving federal work using savings insurance money and the stubborn belief that a child should grow up with something steady beneath her feet. The house was not grand. Vivienne Sterling probably had closets larger than his living room, but it held Nora's drawings on the refrigerator, Clara's books in uneven stacks, and the quiet rhythm of 2 people learning how to be a family after loss had taken the third. He made tomato soup and grilled cheese because Nora had requested hospital food, but Happy then listened while she explained her island map between bites. After dinner, he read to her from the storm chapter of her favorite book. She fell asleep before the ship reached harbor, one hand curled beneath her cheek, the bandaged thumb visible above the blanket. Ethan stood in her doorway longer than he meant to. This was the part of his life that mattered. Not Sterling Group, not old case files, not secrets locked inside rich families. Nora breathing softly in a room full of pencil drawings was the reason he had walked away from everything that once made him useful to the government and dangerous to dishonest men. He had promised Clara in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and lilies that he would give their daughter a life measured in safety, not suspicion. Yet 30 minutes later, he was in the basement opening the wooden box he had not touched in almost a year. The workbench lamp flickered once before holding steady. Inside the box were Clara's scarf letters tied with blue ribbon, her old watch, the hospital bracelet Ethan had never been able to throw away, and the photograph. He lifted it carefully. The young woman in the black and white print stood on a porch Ethan did not recognize, wearing a long coat, hair pulled back by the wind, eyes turned slightly away from the camera. There was no name written on the back, no date, no explanation. Only a dark stain in the upper right corner where water or age had marked the paper. Ethan pulled Vivienne's photograph from his coat and laid it beside Clara's. Two prints, same woman, same porch, same stain. Same impossible bridge between his dead wife and the CEO sleeping off wine in a hotel suite 5 miles away. His breathing slowed. The old investigator inside him, the one grief had buried but not killed, began arranging facts. Clara had been adopted, records sealed. She had searched once weekly before her diagnosis worsened. Vivienne's mother, Rosalind Sterling, rarely spoke about her youth. Sterling family money had deep roots in Maine. The woman in the photo looked young enough to have been photographed 30 years ago. Vivienne carried the image secretly, not in a frame, not in a file, but in her clutch, close enough to touch, during a drunken moment when she called for her mother. Ethan took out the small black notebook he still carried from his bureau days. He opened to a blank page and wrote 3 words, Sterling. Not coincidence. Then he sat on the basement stool until the house above him settled into night. He did not call Vivienne. He did not call anyone. The first rule of an investigation was simple. Never ask a question until you knew what answer could hurt you. Sunday morning arrived bright and cold. At Camden Harbor Inn, Vivienne Sterling woke with a headache sharp enough to make the sunlight feel personal. The suite was too white, too clean, too expensive, and for a moment she could not remember how she had gotten there. Then fragments returned. Shareholder brunch, too much wine after too little sleep, the back seat of the town car, a red light, her clutch falling, a man's hand reaching down. She sat up too quickly and winced. The clutch lay open on the marble side table. She grabbed it and searched the lining, the inner pocket, the loose fold beneath the clasp. Lipstick, keycard receipt. No photograph. Her stomach tightened. The photo had been tucked inside the book in her mother's library for decades before Vivienne found it 6 weeks earlier. She had carried it ever since, telling herself she would ask Rosalind when the right moment came, though she knew there would never be a right moment to ask why a strange young woman's picture had been hidden in a first edition no one had opened for years. Now the photograph was gone, and only one person could have taken it. Ethan Ward, the driver, the quiet man in the front seat, the man she had barely seen because seeing driver's assistants, guards, and staff too clearly made power more complicated. She reached for her phone, then stopped before dialing his number. Something in her refused the direct route. Instead, she called Miriam Vale. The family lawyer answered on the 4th ring, voice rough with age and early morning. Vivienne, I need to ask you something, Vivienne said, and I need you to think before you answer. Always. Vivienne stood and walked to the window. The ocean below the inn was silver and merciless. Did my mother ever have a child before me? The silence that followed was not confusion. It was recognition. Vivienne felt the world tilt beneath her bare feet. At last, Miriam said very softly, "We need to meet." By Monday morning, Vivienne was in Portland, sitting in the back conference room of Miriam Vale's office, where the curtains were always drawn and the coffee tasted like punishment. Miriam did not open a file. She did not perform surprise. She only placed 2 cups on the table and sat across from the woman she had known since birth. Before I say anything, Miriam said, You should understand that I have been waiting for this conversation for 32 years. Vivienne's hands remained folded. Then don't make me wait longer. Miriam looked tired, older than she had on the phone. Yes, your mother had a daughter before you. She was 19. The baby was born in Portland in 1994. On the hospital form, your mother named her Clara. Vivienne did not move. Outside the drawn curtains, traffic passed through rain. Clara. A name she had never heard at Sterling dinners, never seen in family records, never found in speeches or biographies. A sister erased so completely that her absence had become part of the architecture of Vivienne's life. "Where is she?" Vivienne asked. Miriam's eyes lowered. "That is the question I was never allowed to answer." Vivienne drove back to Boston at exactly the speed limit because speed would have felt like panic, and panic was something she did not permit herself. By that evening, she had requested a full internal security trace on Ethan Ward. Not the HR file, everything. Federal records, court filings, press archives, employment history. The report arrived Tuesday morning in a sealed envelope. Vivienne read it standing at her kitchen island. Ethan Ward was not simply a driver. He had graduated from the Naval Academy, served in naval intelligence, earned a law degree, joined the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and specialized in white-collar crime, trust fraud, and shell company networks. He had resigned after his wife, Clara Bennett Ward, died of pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks later, he applied to drive for Sterling Group. Vivienne read the sentence again. Clara Bennett Ward. Clara, born 1994, adopted, deceased, survived by husband Ethan Ward and minor child Nora Ward. The room seemed to lose air. For 3 years, a former federal investigator had been sitting 3 feet from her while she conducted business calls, argued with her mother, cried once after a brutal board meeting, and carried a photograph of his dead wife's unknown mother in her purse. For 3 years, she had called him by the wrong name. At 4:15 Wednesday morning, Vivienne left Boston without telling her office. She drove north through the dark past sleeping towns and black fields, toward the cottage by the water listed in Ethan's file. She arrived before sunrise. The kitchen light was on. Through the window, she saw a little girl in a flannel nightgown sitting at the table, drawing with solemn concentration. The child turned her head slightly, considering her paper, and Vivienne's hand went to the dashboard. The shape of the mouth, the quiet seriousness, something familiar from a sister she had never met, and a photograph she no longer possessed. Vivienne stepped out of the car. Ethan opened the front door before she reached the porch. He was already wearing a coat as if he had expected her. "I figured you'd come before 7, he said. Vivienne looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in 3 years. He was not furniture. He was not a uniform. He was a widower, a father, and possibly the only living bridge to the sister her family had buried without a grave. "We need to talk," she said. Ethan glanced once toward the kitchen window where Nora bent over her map, unaware that her life had just become the center of a secret worth millions and possibly dangerous enough to destroy them all. "Yes," he said quietly, "we do." The porch boards were cold beneath Vivienne Sterling's shoes, damp with the kind of sea mist that settled over Camden before sunrise and made every wooden surface feel older than it was. Ethan Ward did not invite her inside immediately. He stepped out instead, closing the door quietly behind him, as if even the truth needed to wait until Nora finished whatever map she was drawing at the kitchen table. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The harbor below the cottage was still hidden in blue-gray shadow, and the only light came from the kitchen window behind Ethan, warm and domestic, cutting a rectangle across the porch. Vivienne had spent her adult life in rooms designed to make people feel smaller. Boardrooms with glass walls, hotel suites with marble floors, private dining rooms where every word could move millions of dollars. But standing on the porch of a widowed driver's cottage, watching his daughter draw through the window, she felt more exposed than she had in any hostile shareholder meeting. Ethan's face gave her nothing. That composure irritated her, then unsettled her. She had read his file. She knew now that his silence was not emptiness. It was control. "You took my photograph," she said. Ethan did not deny it. "Yes." The simplicity of the answer robbed her of the first accusation she had prepared on the drive north. "Why?" He looked toward the water, then back at her. "Because it matched one my wife kept beside her bed for 10 years. Vivienne's breath tightened, though she had known the answer would hurt. Clara. At the sound of the name, Ethan's expression changed, not dramatically, not enough for someone careless to notice, but enough. His jaw set. His eyes lowered for half a second. Vivienne understood then that Clara was not a fact to him, not a file, not a hidden daughter from 1994. Clara was the woman whose absence still lived in the walls of this house. "Miriam told you," he said. "Some of it." How much Vivienne folded her arms against the cold. "That my mother had a baby before me, a girl, born in Portland, given up under pressure, named Clara on the form." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "Your mother named her Clara. That's what Miriam said." For the first time, Ethan seemed truly shaken. He turned away slightly, one hand resting on the porch rail. She always wondered if the name had been given by someone who loved her or chosen by the family who adopted her. Vivienne looked through the window again. Nora had her tongue pressed against the corner of her mouth, drawing a thin, careful line across the paper. "Did Clara know anything?" "Not enough." Ethan's voice was quiet. "She knew she was adopted. She knew the records were sealed. She wrote letters when she was 27. Portland Archdiocese state offices. Anyone who might have kept a record. Most replies said nothing. A few never came. Then she got sick. The last sentence lay between them like a door neither wanted to open. Vivienne had faced bankruptcies, hostile acquisitions, betrayal by people who smiled over champagne while sharpening knives beneath the table. None of it had prepared her for the strange guilt of mourning a sister she had never met. A woman who had searched for a mother and found only silence. A woman who had died while Vivienne was alive, rich, protected, and completely unaware. "I didn't know," Vivienne said. It sounded useless the moment she said it. Ethan did not punish her for it. Neither did I. The kitchen door opened behind him before Vivienne could answer. Nora appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a pale blue robe too big for her shoulders, holding a colored pencil in one hand. She stopped when she saw Vivienne and studied her with the direct, unfiltered gaze of a child who had not yet learned to pretend not to notice things. "Daddy," she said, "there's a lady." Ethan's face softened instantly. The change was so complete that Vivienne felt a small, unexpected ache. "I see her, sweetheart. This is Ms. Sterling. She came to talk about your mom." Nora's eyes widened, not with fear, but with interest. "My mom!" Ethan crouched slightly, keeping his voice calm. "A friend of your mom's family." Vivienne felt the words pass through her. Friend. Family. Both true and not true enough. Nora looked at Vivienne again. "Are you the lady who fell asleep in Daddy's car?" Vivienne, who had dismantled executives with silence, found herself unable to speak. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if accepting a small private punishment from the universe. "Nora, you said she was tired from a brunch. I said she had a long day." Nora nodded, satisfied with the correction. Then she looked at Vivienne's coat, her polished shoes, her careful face, and asked, "Did you know my mom?" The question struck with such innocence that Vivienne almost took a step back. "No," she said, and her voice came out softer than she intended. "I wish I had." Nora seemed to consider whether that was a good answer. Then she held up her paper. "I'm drawing an island, but it keeps turning into a house." Ethan stood. "Finish it inside, sweetheart. I'll make breakfast in a minute. Can Miss Sterling have pancakes?" Vivienne had not eaten since the previous afternoon, but the idea of sitting at Ethan Ward's kitchen table eating pancakes while the ghost of her unknown sister stood between them felt impossible. Ethan answered before she had to. "Maybe another time." Nora nodded with the easy acceptance of children who trusted that adults knew what they were doing. The door closed again. Vivienne watched her return to the kitchen table, and something inside her shifted uneasily. Until that moment. The secret had been about her mother, her family history, her missing photograph. Now it had a face. A 7-year-old girl with Clara's mouth drawing a house she did not know she had inherited in blood and silence. Ethan reached into his coat and took out a small frame. He set it on the porch bench between them. Clara smiled from behind the glass, younger than Vivienne expected, with wind in her hair and the same black and white photograph held up in one hand as if someone off camera had said something funny. Vivienne sat slowly. Her knees felt less reliable than they had an hour ago. Ethan took the stolen photograph from his inside pocket and placed it beside the frame. Vivienne opened her clutch and removed a second copy Miriam had given her that morning from the lawyer's archive. 3 images now. Clara laughing, the unknown young woman on the porch, the same face printed twice carried by 2 women who had never known what they were to each other. "My mother," Vivienne said. Ethan looked at the photograph. Clara's mother. Vivienne swallowed. "My sister." The word came out almost soundless, but once spoken, it changed the world around it. Sister. Not scandal, not complication, not family history. Sister. Ethan closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them, the investigator had returned. "Who else knows Miriam?" "My mother, obviously. Maybe no one else. Maybe this is the Sterling family, Ethan. Secrets have staff." It was the first time she had used his name, and they both noticed. Ethan's expression remained controlled, but the air changed. He was no longer only the driver she had ignored. She was no longer only the CEO he served. They had crossed some invisible line, and there would be no way to step back to surnames and polished distance. "Does your mother know Clara died?" he asked. Vivienne looked down at her hands. "Not yet." Ethan's face hardened, not with cruelty, but with the weight of what had to happen next. "Then she needs to hear it from me. From you, I was her husband." Vivienne almost objected out of reflex. The Sterling instinct was to manage impact, control the room, prepare statements, cushion consequences. But this was not a press leak. This was a mother learning that the child she had lost once had been lost again forever. And Ethan was right. He had earned the grief in a way Vivienne had not. She nodded. "I'll call her. Not here while Nora can hear." The reminder was gentle, but it carried the edge of a father's authority. Vivienne glanced at the kitchen window. Nora was coloring now, unaware of the adults arranging the destruction and repair of her family tree on the other side of the glass. "There's something else," Vivienne said. Ethan waited. "After I read your file, I wondered why you came to Sterling Group 6 weeks after Clara's funeral. A former FBI financial investigator becoming a driver for a company connected to his wife's unknown birth family. That does not look innocent." There it was. The accusation she had driven 3 hours to make. Ethan did not flinch. "I didn't know Sterling was connected to Clara. You expect me to believe that?" "No," he said. "I expect you to verify it." The answer surprised her. "I will." "Good." He leaned against the porch rail, suddenly looking tired in a way the early morning could not explain. "I left the bureau because Clara died and Nora needed a father who came home. Sterling Group needed drivers with security clearance for executive transport. The pay was steady. The hours were predictable enough. I took the job because grief doesn't pay a mortgage." Vivienne looked away first. Not because she fully believed him yet, but because the bluntness of the answer left no elegant place for suspicion to stand. "You should have told me what you were," she said. "You never asked who I was." That landed harder than it should have. Vivienne thought of 3 years of back seats, phone calls, curt instructions, her reflection in the window while Ethan sat 3 feet away. She had trusted him with her movements, but not noticed his humanity. She had not known his name until a background report made him useful to her. "Fair," she said quietly. Ethan did not look satisfied. He looked as if fairness were irrelevant now. "Call your mother." Vivienne took out her phone and stepped to the far end of the porch. Rosalind Sterling answered on the second ring, composed as always. "Vivienne, it is barely 6. Come to Camden, today, now." Silence, then colder. "What have you found?" Vivienne closed her eyes. So her mother had known this day might come. "Clara," she said. On the line, Rosalind made no sound, but Vivienne heard the absence of breath. Her name was Clara Bennett Ward. She died 3 years ago. She has a daughter. A faint noise came through the phone, something like a cup being set down too hard. "I'm leaving now," Rosalind said and hung up. Vivienne returned to the bench. Ethan was watching the harbor, but she knew he had heard enough. "She'll be here by late morning. Then we tell Nora what she needs to know before strangers start crying in her living room." Vivienne frowned. What can you possibly tell a 7-year-old Ethan looked through the window at his daughter? The truth small enough for her hands. That sentence stayed with Vivienne long after they went inside. Ethan made coffee and pancakes. Vivienne sat at the kitchen table because Nora insisted, and because refusing felt more unkind than staying. The cottage kitchen smelled of butter, salt air, and pencil shavings. Nora showed her the map that had started as an island and become unmistakably a house with a long porch and a crooked tree near the edge. Vivienne looked at it and felt a faint chill. "Have you seen this house before?" she asked. Nora shook her head. "Mama told me about it. She said she dreamed it when she was little." Ethan turned from the stove. "She told you that?" "A long time ago." Nora frowned in concentration. "She said there was a gray porch and a tree that leaned the wrong way and a road down to rocks. But I don't know where the road goes." Vivienne's pulse thudded. Rosalind had grown up spending summers at her grandmother's house in Rockland, a house with a gray porch, a spruce tree, and a gravel drive that sloped to the rocks. Vivienne had not been there since childhood. Clara had never been there at all. Ethan saw the change in her face. What Vivienne touched the edge of Nora's drawing. "I know that house." Nora brightened. "Really, I think so." The room grew quiet. Ethan stared at the map as if it had become another photograph, another piece of impossible evidence. Vivienne felt the conflict inside him deepen. She could see it now because she was finally looking. Part of him wanted answers. Part of him wanted to close every door before the Sterling name could enter Nora's life and bring money power, lawyers, and pain with it. His decision was not simply whether to help Vivienne. It was whether to let his daughter belong to the family that had abandoned her mother. By 11, Rosalind Sterling arrived in a black sedan wearing a gray wool coat and no makeup. She had aged 10 years since Vivienne last saw her at dinner 2 weeks before. She stood at the foot of the porch as if the steps might refuse her. Ethan opened the door. Nora stood beside him in a clean dress with embroidered blue flowers at the collar, one hand holding his sleeve. "Hello," Nora said politely. "I'm Nora." Rosalind's hand trembled as she extended it. "Hello, Nora." She stopped there, unable to say what she was. Grandmother was too much. Stranger was too little. Vivienne watched her mother's face and saw for the first time the 19-year-old girl buried beneath decades of wealth and discipline. Inside, they sat in the living room. Ethan made tea no one drank. Nora was excused upstairs to finish her map, though she paused halfway up to look back at Rosalind with curiosity rather than fear. When she was gone, Rosalind folded both hands in her lap and looked at Ethan. "You were married to my daughter." Ethan nodded. "I was." Was she loved? The question broke through every careful thing Vivienne had planned to say. Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "Every day." Rosalind pressed one hand to her mouth. No sob escaped. She had too much training for that, but tears slipped down her face silently, and Vivienne realized she had never seen her mother cry before. Not at funerals, not after her father's death, not during any crisis. Rosalind had built her life around containment. Now containment was failing. "I was 19, Rosalind said. "His name was Thomas Reed. He worked at my father's boatyard. My parents said if I kept the baby, they would cut me off and destroy him. I believed them. I was young enough to be frightened and old enough to be ashamed of my fear." She looked at Vivienne. "I signed the papers in Portland. I named her Clara. They told me the family could change it. I prayed every year they had not." "They didn't," Ethan said. Rosalind closed her eyes. What was she like? Ethan looked toward the stairs where Nora's pencil moved softly across paper. Funny, stubborn, kind in a way that made people feel forgiven before they apologized. She loved maps, old houses, thunderstorms, and blueberry pie. She hated being pitied. She wanted to know where she came from, but she was afraid wanting it meant she was ungrateful to the parents who raised her. Rosalind bent forward, then both hands over her face. Vivienne sat frozen, torn between comforting her mother and resenting her, between grief for Clara and anger that this truth had been hidden long enough to become irreversible. Ethan did not touch Rosalind. He rested one hand lightly on the arm of her chair, not on her body, just near enough to steady the space around her. The gesture undid Vivienne more than an embrace would have. It was careful, respectful. A widower offering mercy he did not owe. When Rosalind finally lifted her head, her eyes moved toward the ceiling. May I meet her properly? Ethan's entire body changed. Vivienne saw the father step forward inside him, protective and immovable. Nora is not a remedy, he said. Rosalind flinched. I know. She is not a second chance at Clara. I know. She is 7. She has already lost her mother. I will not let anyone enter her life out of guilt and disappear when the feeling becomes inconvenient. Rosalind nodded, tears still falling. You are right. Vivienne watched Ethan, and in that moment something shifted in her understanding of power. She had seen men dominate rooms with titles, money, volume. Ethan did none of that. He simply named the boundary, and everyone in the room knew it would hold. There may be legal matters, Rosalind said after a long silence. Vivienne's head turned sharply. What legal matters? Rosalind looked at Miriam, who had arrived quietly minutes earlier and now stood near the doorway with a leather folder held against her chest. Vivienne had not even heard her come in. Miriam's face was grave. This is where the conversation becomes more dangerous. Ethan looked from Rosalind to Miriam. Explain. Miriam sat slowly. After Rosalind surrendered Clara, she came to me. She created a trust for the child. Quietly, privately. She funded it for decades. Vivienne stared at her mother. You never told me. I couldn't speak of Clara, Rosalind whispered. But I could send money into the dark and hope one day it would reach her. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The investigator was fully awake now. How much? Miriam opened the folder. As of the last true statement I received access to, approximately $45 million. The room went still. Upstairs, Nora's pencil continued moving small and steady, unaware that a number had just dropped through the ceiling of her life like a stone through glass. Ethan did not look impressed. He looked alarmed. Who controls it? Miriam hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Vivienne felt cold spread through her. Miriam, she said, who controls the trust? Grant Sterling was made trustee of record in 2002. Rosalind's face drained of color. No. Miriam's eyes remained on Ethan. And for 22 years, the statements Rosalind received were not the real statements. Ethan reached for the folder. No one stopped him. He scanned the first page, then the second, faster than Vivienne could follow. His expression changed by degrees. Recognition, anger, certainty. Shell entities, he said. Delaware, Bermuda, Cayman feeder. Management fees routed back through a nominee-owned advisory firm. Vivienne stood slowly. Grant stole it. Ethan looked up. His voice was quiet, but the quiet had teeth. Not all at once. Men like him don't steal like thieves. They relocate, restructure, reclassify. They bury the knife under paperwork. Rosalind looked as if she might be sick. I trusted him. That was the point, Ethan said. Vivienne felt the conflict reach its peak inside the room. This was no longer only about a hidden sister, a grieving mother, or a child's lost inheritance. This was a war against the man sitting at the top of Sterling Group. A man with board loyalty, legal teams, private investigators, and enough influence to ruin anyone who threatened him. Ethan closed the folder and looked toward the stairs. Nora is the heir. Miriam nodded. As Clara's surviving child, yes. Vivienne looked at Ethan. We can fight him. Ethan's face hardened. You can fight him. This is your family and your company. It is your daughter's trust. And that is exactly why I should take her and leave before your family turns her into a headline. The words struck hard because they were not cruel. They were reasonable. Vivienne could see the decision in front of him: protect Nora by disappearing or protect Nora by stepping directly into the Sterling war. The old Ethan, the grieving father hiding in a driver's uniform, wanted distance. But the man reading the folder understood that distance would not protect Nora from stolen money, sealed records, or Grant's power. Silence had already cost Clara a mother. Silence could cost Nora her future. Rosalind stood unsteadily. Mr. Ward, I do not deserve your help, I know that. But Clara deserved better from me. Nora deserves better from all of us. If Grant has stolen what belongs to her, I will not hide behind shame anymore. Vivienne looked at Ethan too, no longer as an employer, no longer as a suspicious CEO, but as the only person in the room who could read the fraud well enough to stop it. I have ignored you for 3 years, she said. I called you by the wrong name. I treated your silence like service instead of grief. I cannot undo that. But I am asking you now, Ethan, not as my driver, as Clara's husband. Help me take him down. Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked at the ceiling where Nora was drawing a map of a house her mother had never seen but somehow remembered. He looked at Clara's photograph on the side table. Then he looked at the trust folder, at the paper trail of a rich man stealing from a dead woman and a child. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but the decision inside it was final. I will help recover what belongs to Nora. I will help expose Grant. But understand this clearly. I do not work for Sterling Group anymore. I do not work for you. I work for my daughter. Vivienne nodded. Then we start there. Ethan opened the folder again, and this time he did not read it like a man trying to decide whether to enter the fight. He read it like the fight had already begun. Down the hall, Nora's bedroom door opened. Daddy, she called. Everyone froze. Ethan stood at once. Yes, sweetheart. Nora appeared at the top of the stairs holding her map. The house needs a road. Does family mean people who know the road back? No one in the living room moved. Ethan looked at his daughter, then at the women who had arrived carrying secrets, money guilt, and the first fragile possibility of repair. His face softened with pain and love. Sometimes, he said, sometimes family means people willing to build one. Nora seemed satisfied. She went back into her room. Ethan sat down, pulled the folder closer, and reached for a pen. The decision had been made. The driver was gone. The investigator had returned. And somewhere in Boston, Grant Sterling had no idea that the man he had mistaken for invisible was about to follow every hidden dollar home. By Thursday morning, Ethan Ward had turned Vivienne Sterling's rented dining room into a battlefield made of paper. Bank statements covered the polished table in 3 long rows. Trust documents sat in one stack, shell company registrations in another, and printed wire confirmations in a third. Each page marked with blue pencil red circles, and the kind of small, precise notes that made Vivienne understand why men like Grant Sterling feared investigators more than they feared accusations. Accusations could be denied, feelings could be dismissed, but numbers, once lined up correctly, became a weapon. Ethan stood at the head of the table in shirt sleeves, one hand braced on the wood, the other holding a page from a Delaware management company that had no office, no employees, and somehow received 6-figure consulting fees every quarter from a trust created for a baby girl abandoned in 1994. He had slept 2 hours. Vivienne had slept less. Miriam Vale sat near the window with her reading glasses low on her nose, reviewing the original trust language line by line. Rosalind had returned to the inn to rest, though Vivienne suspected her mother was not sleeping. No one who had spent 32 years burying a daughter could sleep easily after learning that the daughter had died and the money meant to protect her child had been stolen by the man sharing her breakfast table. Here, Ethan said, tapping the page. This is the pattern. Every April, July, October, and January, Grant moved funds out as administrative restructuring fees. The money went to a Delaware advisory entity. That entity sent 90% to a Bermuda holding company within 7 days. Bermuda sent it through a Cayman feeder, then back into a separate Delaware firm controlled by a nominee. That nominee is connected to Grant through a private foundation. Vivienne leaned closer. Can we prove he owns it? Not directly from this. Then what do we have? Ethan looked up. His eyes were tired but sharp. We have enough to make every director in Sterling Tower understand that protecting him will make them look either corrupt or incompetent. For Friday, that's enough. Miriam nodded. For the board, yes. For the court, we continue building. Vivienne walked slowly along the table, following the paper trail as if it were a map through a city designed by thieves. She had run Sterling Group for years, negotiated acquisitions, survived hostile investors, and outmaneuvered men who thought her last name was the only reason she had power. Yet she had never felt as exposed as she did now, standing in a small, rented house, while the former driver she had ignored for 3 years revealed that her family empire had been rotting from inside the whole time. Grant will say this is personal, she said. He'll say I'm unstable because of the Clara situation. He'll say you manipulated me. Ethan's mouth tightened. He already has. Vivienne turned. What does that mean? Before Ethan could answer, his phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen. The color left his face in a way Vivienne had not seen before. Not fear exactly, something colder. He answered. June. His voice changed immediately, becoming softer but more urgent. Slow down, what happened? Vivienne went still. Nora. She knew it before he said the name. Ethan listened, his hand closing around the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. Do not let anyone take her. I'm on my way. He ended the call and was already reaching for his coat. Grant sent someone to Nora's school. Vivienne's stomach dropped. What? A woman claiming to be from Sterling Family Legal Services. She told the office there was a custody-related emergency and that Nora needed to be released to her grandmother's representatives. Miriam stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. That is illegal! That is Grant! Ethan said. His voice was flat now, stripped of every unnecessary emotion. June happened to be there dropping off paperwork. She saw the woman and called me before the school released Nora. Vivienne grabbed her keys. I'm coming! No. Ethan's answer was immediate. Yes, she said sharper. This is my family's war. He used my name, my company, my mother. I'm coming. Ethan looked at her, and for a second the room returned to what it had been before employer and driver, Sterling and Ward, power and resistance. Then something shifted. He understood maybe that shutting her out would not protect Nora from Grant. It would only leave Vivienne ignorant of what Grant was willing to do. Fine, he said, but at the school I speak first. They drove in Vivienne's car through rain that had begun without warning, hard, silver lines striking the windshield. Ethan sat in the passenger seat silent except for one call to the school principal and another to a local attorney Miriam recommended. Vivienne drove faster than she should have, but Ethan did not comment. She gripped the wheel and felt a rage so clean it almost frightened her. Grant had attacked many people in many ways with money pressure, gossip, legal threats. But sending someone for a 7-year-old girl was different. It was not strategy. It was cruelty wearing a suit. They arrived at the school to find June Miller waiting near the office with Nora pressed against her side. Nora's backpack hung from one shoulder. Her eyes were wide, but she was not crying until she saw Ethan. Then her face crumpled. Daddy Ethan crossed the hallway in 3 strides and dropped to one knee, pulling her into his arms. He did not ask questions at first. He did not look for witnesses. He simply held his daughter, one hand against the back of her head, the other wrapped around her small shoulders. Vivienne stopped a few feet away, suddenly aware that she had no place in that embrace yet. Nora clung to him. The lady said Grandma Rose was sick and I had to go. Ethan's jaw tightened against her hair. You did exactly right staying with June. She knew my name. I know. She knew Mama's name too. Ethan closed his eyes. Vivienne looked toward the principal's office, where a woman in a beige coat sat stiffly between two school administrators, her face pale now that the situation had failed to go quietly. On the table beside her was a folder bearing the Sterling Group letterhead. Vivienne walked into the office without knocking. The woman looked up, startled. "Ms. Sterling." Vivienne's voice was low. "Who sent you?" "I was instructed that—" "Who sent you?" The woman swallowed. "Mr. Grant Sterling's office." Vivienne took the folder from the table. Inside were forged authorization letters, a fabricated emergency guardianship note, and a memo implying that Ethan Ward was under internal investigation for misconduct involving a Sterling principal. Grant had not merely tried to frighten Ethan, he had tried to create a record that made Ethan look unstable, unethical, and potentially unfit as Nora's guardian. Vivienne felt sick. Ethan entered the office with Nora in his arms. He looked at the folder once and understood all of it. "He's building a custody threat," Ethan said. The woman in beige stared at the floor. The principal began apologizing, but Ethan lifted one hand. "Document everything. Preserve the security footage. No one deletes an email, call log, visitor form, or camera file. The next person who tries to remove my daughter without my written authorization leaves in handcuffs." His voice was quiet, but the principal nodded as if shouted at. Vivienne placed the forged documents into her bag. "These are coming with us. They're school property," the principal said weakly. Vivienne looked at him. "They are evidence of attempted child abduction using forged corporate authority. You may request copies from counsel." No one argued after that. In the car, Nora sat in the back seat beside Ethan instead of in the front with Vivienne. She held his hand with both of hers while June followed them back to the cottage. The rain softened as they drove toward the harbor, but the world felt changed. Grant had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The conflict was no longer a hidden financial dispute. It had reached into Ethan's daughter's school, into the one place he believed was safe. Back at the cottage, Nora refused to let Ethan leave the kitchen. She sat at the table with a blanket around her shoulders while he made hot chocolate. Vivienne stood near the counter, watching him move through familiar rituals with hands that shook only when Nora looked away. "Is Grandma Rose really sick?" Nora asked. Ethan set the mug in front of her. "No, sweetheart. Someone lied." "Why?" He sat across from her. "Because some adults think lying helps them get what they want." Nora frowned. "What did they want?" Ethan hesitated. Vivienne watched the decision pass through him. He could hide the truth, or he could make it small enough for Nora's hands, as he had said on the porch. "They wanted to scare me," he said, "because I found out they took something that belonged to your mom, and now belongs to you." Nora looked down into her hot chocolate. "Is it a map?" The question almost broke Vivienne. Ethan smiled faintly, though his eyes were wet. "In a way." Nora accepted this. Children, Vivienne was learning, did not always need the whole truth. They needed a truth that did not betray them later. After Nora went upstairs with June to pack a small overnight bag, Ethan stood at the sink, both hands braced on the counter. Vivienne set the forged documents beside him. "This helps us," she said. Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. "He tried to take my daughter, and now we can show the board exactly what he is." Ethan turned on her anger, finally breaking through. "The board! You are still thinking about the board!" Vivienne did not step back. "Yes, because that is where his power sits. You can protect Nora for one day by hiding her. You protect her future by removing him from every lever he can pull." Ethan's breathing was hard. For a moment, Vivienne thought he might walk away from all of it. Take Nora disappear. Let Sterling Group burn. And some part of her would not have blamed him. Then Nora's footsteps sounded faintly overhead, followed by June's gentle voice. Ethan looked toward the ceiling. When he spoke again, the anger had changed shape. It had become purpose. "He wanted me emotional," he said. "Reactive, sloppy." Vivienne nodded. "Yes, he wanted me to look like a desperate father with something to hide." "Yes." Ethan picked up the forged guardianship memo. "Then tomorrow he gets the opposite. By nightfall, the cottage had become command central. June took Nora to stay with a trusted family friend whose address Miriam kept off every written record. Rosalind called twice, the second time crying when she learned Grant had used her name to lure Nora. Ethan did not comfort her, but neither did he accuse her. That was its own kind of mercy. Miriam filed emergency notices preserving school evidence. Vivienne called 3 board members she trusted and said only, "Come tomorrow, prepared to hear evidence, not rumors." Ethan worked at the kitchen table until after midnight, rebuilding the presentation around Grant's mistake. The original case had been financial. Shell companies forged statements, stolen trust assets. Now there was a human pattern to match the paper one. Grant did not merely steal from Clara's trust, he used institutions as weapons. A school, a company letterhead, a grandmother's name, a child's fear. Vivienne sat opposite Ethan, sorting documents into folders marked Trust Board School Criminal Referral. At 1 a.m. their hands met over the same page. This time neither pulled away quickly. The rain had stopped. The house was quiet without Nora in it. Too quiet. Ethan looked at Vivienne, and the exhaustion in his face made him seem more human than she had ever allowed him to be when he sat behind the wheel. "I should have stayed invisible," he said. Vivienne shook her head. "Invisible people are easy to use. So are powerful ones." Then tomorrow, she said, we stop being useful to him. For the first time all day, Ethan almost smiled. Not warmly, not with ease, but with the sharp recognition of a man who had found the line of attack. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and wrote the opening sentence for the board presentation. "Grant Sterling is not a family embarrassment. He is a corporate liability." Vivienne read it, then looked up. "That will get their attention." Ethan capped the pen. "Good." Outside the harbor lay dark and still. Somewhere safe, Nora was sleeping with her map rolled in her backpack. Somewhere in Boston. Grant Sterling was likely congratulating himself on having frightened a driver back into silence. But Ethan Ward was no longer the silent man behind the wheel, and by morning the road Grant had built out of lies would begin leading back to him. By Friday morning, Ethan Ward no longer looked like a man trying to stay invisible. For 3 years, invisibility had been his protection. A dark suit, polished shoes, quiet hands on the steering wheel, eyes forward, voice low, presence useful but forgettable. Executives had spoken over him, around him, through him. Assistants had handed him schedules without meeting his eyes. Vivienne Sterling herself had called him by the wrong name for so long that the mistake had become part of his uniform. But when he stood in front of the mirror in his cottage bedroom that morning, buttoning the charcoal gray suit he had not worn since Clara's funeral, Ethan understood that the disguise had ended. The driver was gone. The father remained. The investigator had returned. And the man who had spent years hiding his grief behind service was about to walk into Sterling Tower and make one of the most powerful men in Boston answer for stealing from a dead woman and threatening a child. The house was too quiet without Nora. She had slept at June Miller's sister's home 2 towns inland under a name that would not appear in any Sterling Group file. Ethan had spoken to her before dawn. She had tried to sound brave, but her voice had been small and sleepy, wrapped around questions she did not know how to ask. "Are you going to get the map back today?" she had whispered. Ethan had closed his eyes in the kitchen, one hand around a coffee cup gone cold. "I'm going to try, sweetheart. Is Miss Sterling helping?" "Yes. Is Grandma Rose sad?" He had looked across the room at Rosalind Sterling, who sat at the table with both hands folded around a mug she had not touched, her face hollow from a night of crying and not sleeping. "Yes," Ethan said, "but sad people can still do brave things." Nora had been quiet a moment. "Can scared people?" Ethan had smiled then, though it hurt. "Especially scared people." After the call, Rosalind had finally spoken. "She asked about me." Ethan nodded. "She did." Rosalind looked down at her hands. "I do not deserve that." Ethan had heard versions of that sentence all week from Rosalind, from Vivienne, from himself in the darker corners of his mind. He did not know what people deserved. He only knew what children needed. "Nora does not need you to deserve her," he said. "She needs you to be honest with her." Rosalind's eyes filled again, but she nodded. That was the beginning of something, not forgiveness, not yet, but a road facing the right direction. At 8:30, Vivienne arrived at the cottage in a black coat, her hair pulled back, her face pale but composed. She carried a leather folder in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. "You look like the man in the report," she said when Ethan opened the door. "You look like a CEO walking into a knife fight," he answered. I suppose we both dressed honestly. It was the closest either of them came to humor. Miriam Vale joined them in Camden, and together the three drove south toward Boston, while Rosalind followed in a separate car with a private security driver Vivienne trusted. The highway unrolled beneath a low sky. For the first 20 minutes, no one spoke. Ethan reviewed the sequence in his head: trust structure, shell entities, forged statements, the school incident board, liability, criminal referral. He would not ask the board to care about Clara. Caring was unreliable in corporate rooms. He would show them risk. He would turn Grant's cruelty into something directors could not distance themselves from. A company could ignore grief. It could not ignore exposure. Vivienne sat beside him in the back seat, reading the same first page again and again. Ethan noticed her fingers tighten when she reached the line about Nora's school. "You don't have to present that part," he said. "Yes, I do. It involves my daughter. And my stepfather used my company's letterhead to try to take her." She looked at him then. "I know I don't have the right to feel protective of Nora. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I do. And I'm tired of pretending family begins only when paperwork catches up." Ethan studied her face. There was no performance in it, no CEO polish, just guilt, anger, and the first fragile shape of love for a child who had entered her life through a wound. "Then say it carefully," he said. "I will." The 34th floor of Sterling Tower was all glass, steel, and height. Boston Harbor spread beyond the windows, gray and cold under the morning light. 12 board members sat around the long table, each with a tablet, a folder, and the tense expression of people who had expected corporate politics and begun to suspect they were about to witness something worse. Grant Sterling sat at the head of the table, perfectly dressed, silver cufflinks gleaming, his expression controlled. He looked at Vivienne first, then Miriam, then Ethan. For a fraction of a second, surprise disturbed his face. Then contempt replaced it. "This is irregular," Grant said. "So was sending a forged custody representative to a child's school," Vivienne replied. The room went still. Grant's eyes hardened. "Careful, Vivienne." Ethan took his seat without looking away from him. "That advice is late." Grant glanced at the directors, recovering quickly. "Before this becomes theater, I would like the minutes to reflect that Ms. Sterling appears to have allowed personal instability to compromise corporate process. The man beside her is a former employee terminated for breaching confidentiality." Ethan opened his folder. "False. I was terminated by a memo you signed after discovering I could identify the trust structure you copied from a federal fraud case." Grant's face did not change, but one director leaned forward. That was enough. Ethan stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse first. He built the room brick by brick. In 1994, Rosalind Crane, now Rosalind Sterling, established a private trust for her biological daughter, Clara Bennett Ward. That trust was funded over 32 years and was designed to pass to Clara's direct heir if Clara was identified. Clara died 3 years ago. Her surviving heir is my minor daughter, Nora Ward. A murmur moved through the table. Ethan placed the first chart on the screen. In 2002, Grant Sterling became trustee of record. From that point forward, the real statements and the statements provided to Rosalind Sterling diverged. Here is the public-facing statement. Here is the actual account activity. He clicked once. Numbers appeared side by side. The room changed. Emotion could be dismissed. Discrepancies could not. Ethan walked them through the transfers, the Delaware advisory entity, the Bermuda holding company, the Cayman feeder, the return loop through a nominee-owned management firm. He explained layering without dramatics. He explained fees that were not fees. He explained how money could leave a trust without appearing stolen to anyone who had been trained not to look too closely. Then he placed another document on the screen, the forged school authorization. Vivienne took over. Her voice was steady, but Ethan saw what it cost her. Yesterday, a woman acting under instructions from Grant Sterling's office attempted to remove Nora Ward from school using fabricated corporate authority and my mother's name. This was not a family misunderstanding. It was an escalation. It was also a preview of what this company will become if its board continues to shelter a chairman who uses Sterling Group systems to intimidate children. Grant stood. That is a disgusting distortion. The door opened before he could say more. Rosalind Sterling entered wearing a gray wool coat and no jewelry except a wedding ring that looked suddenly heavy on her hand. She did not sit. She looked at Grant as if seeing him clearly for the first time in 26 years. "Did you know her name?" she asked. Grant's jaw tightened. "Rosalind, this is not the place. Did you know my daughter's name when you began taking from her trust?" The room did not breathe. Grant's face flushed. "You are emotional." Rosalind gave a small, broken laugh. "Yes, I am. I gave away a child when I was 19 because powerful people told me fear was wisdom. Then I married a man who used my silence as an account number. I have been emotional for 32 years. I simply mistook it for shame." Vivienne's eyes filled, but she kept her shoulders straight. Ethan looked at Rosalind and felt something in him loosen. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. She was not asking to be excused. She was choosing to stand where she should have stood decades earlier, and though it was too late for Clara, it was not too late for Nora. Grant looked around the table and understood the room had shifted without his permission. "This is sentimental blackmail," he said. Ethan closed the folder and placed both hands on the table. "No, this is liability. By Monday morning, Miriam Vale will file for trust restoration and refer the financial record to federal authorities. The school incident is already preserved by camera call log and witness statement. Every director at this table now has notice. From this minute forward, supporting Grant Sterling is not loyalty. It is exposure." That was the sentence that broke the board. Directors began whispering to counsel. One asked for copies. Another asked whether the audit committee had ever reviewed trust-related entities. A third pushed his chair back as if distance might protect him. Grant tried to regain control, but control depended on belief, and belief had left the room. Vivienne stood at the head of the table, not where Grant sat, but beside him, close enough to make the contrast unmistakable. "The amended motion is this: immediate removal of Grant Sterling as chairman, suspension of all access to Sterling Group financial systems, full cooperation with outside counsel and federal review, and confirmation of trust restoration proceedings for Nora Ward." Grant turned on her. "You would destroy this family." Vivienne looked at her mother, then at Ethan, then down at the file bearing Clara's name. "No," she said. "I'm done letting you define what family means." The vote took less than 7 minutes. 11 in favor, none opposed. Grant did not vote. By the time the secretary recorded the result, his resignation had already been written on a yellow legal pad and signed with a hand that shook from rage. Security escorted him out through a private corridor. He did not look back at Rosalind. He did look once at Ethan, and in that look was the hatred of a man who had mistaken quiet for weakness. Ethan felt no triumph, only exhaustion. The first part was over. The harder parts waited outside the room. Court filings, criminal inquiries, headlines, Nora's questions, Rosalind's guilt, Vivienne's grief, his own fear that he had dragged his daughter too close to the Sterling machine, even while trying to protect her from it. After the meeting, Vivienne found him alone near the windows. Below them, Boston moved as if nothing had happened. "You were right," she said. "About what?" The board didn't need to care. They needed to understand danger. Ethan watched a ferry cut through the harbor. That doesn't make it noble. No, but it made it work. She stood beside him, not too close. What happens now? Miriam files. The trust gets frozen, then restored. Federal authorities decide what to do with Grant. Nora stays protected. And us, Ethan turned. The question carried more than strategy. They both knew it. Us could mean legal coordination. It could mean Clara's memory. It could mean the fragile new bridge between a widower, a CEO, a grandmother, and a child drawing maps of houses she had never seen. Ethan did not answer quickly. Nora comes first. Vivienne nodded. Always. She does not become a Sterling project. No. She does not become your mother's redemption. No. And she does not become a reason for either of us to confuse grief with something else. Vivienne absorbed that, and he saw the hurt pass through her. But she did not deny it. That mattered. Then we go slowly, she said. Honestly. Ethan looked back out at the water. Slowly. Honestly. Those were not words he had allowed himself in years. His life since Clara's death had been built around endurance, not possibility. Yet the morning had changed him. Not because Grant was gone, not because money would be restored, but because Ethan had stepped into the open and survived being seen. He was not only the grieving husband, not only the careful father, not only the former agent or the driver who knew how to disappear. He could be all of those things and still build forward. At the cottage that evening, Nora returned home with her backpack and map tube clutched to her chest. She ran to Ethan first, then stopped and looked at Rosalind, who stood uncertainly by the porch steps. "Did you do the brave thing?" Nora asked her. Rosalind's face crumpled. She crouched carefully, not reaching, not assuming. "I tried." Nora studied her, then opened her map tube and pulled out the drawing of the house with the gray porch. "Daddy says family can be people willing to build one." Rosalind nodded through tears. "Your daddy is right." Nora held out a colored pencil. "Then you can help with the road." Rosalind took it like a sacred object. Vivienne stood beside Ethan in the doorway, watching mother and granddaughter bend over the map on the porch boards. "That looks like a beginning," she said quietly. Ethan felt the ache of Clara's absence beside the warmth of Nora's small voice, the bitterness of lost years beside the strange mercy of this moment. "No," he said after a while. "It looks like a way back." And for the first time in years, the road ahead did not frighten him as much as the thought of never taking it. The final transfer cleared on a Tuesday afternoon while Ethan Ward was sanding the leg of a kitchen chair in his workshop. His phone vibrated once on the shelf beside the window where pine dust gathered in soft, golden lines beneath the spring light. He glanced at the screen expecting a message from Nora's school, or a calendar reminder from Miriam Vale. Instead, he saw the confirmation from the court-appointed trustee. The Clara Bennett Ward Trust had been fully restored under guardianship for Nora Ward. Total recovered principal and accrued interest, $45,312,000. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared at the number. $45 million should have felt enormous. It should have changed the shape of the room, the air, the future. But the workshop remained the same. The old radio hummed quietly. The harbor wind pushed against the loose pane near the door. Sawdust clung to Ethan's sleeves. Upstairs, Nora's rain boots were still crooked by the back entrance, and her cereal bowl from breakfast was still soaking in the sink. The number on the screen was not a miracle. It was not a happy ending. It was proof that Clara had been loved before she knew it stolen from after she died, and finally defended too late for her to see it. Ethan set the phone down and kept sanding. That was what he knew how to do when emotion became too large to hold. He worked the rough places smooth, one careful motion at a time. By then, everything had become public. Grant Sterling's resignation from the board had made business headlines, first dressed in polite language about internal governance failures and ongoing review. Within days, the truth broke through the polished wording. Federal investigators opened a case. Sterling Group released a statement confirming cooperation with authorities. The forged school documents became part of the criminal referral. Shell companies were frozen. Offshore accounts were traced. Men who had spent years moving money through paper doors suddenly found those doors locked from the other side. Grant tried to fight, of course. Men like him always did. He claimed misunderstanding, delegated authority, clerical confusion, emotional manipulation by a grieving family. But Miriam's documents were too precise, Ethan's analysis too clean, and the school security footage too damning. There was no way to explain why a representative from Grant's office had tried to remove a 7-year-old child from school under false authority. There was no way to call that accounting. There was no way to bury it beneath procedure. For Vivienne Sterling, the scandal should have destroyed her. Instead, it remade her. She stepped down as daily CEO before the board could pressure her, then accepted the chairmanship with a public promise to rebuild Sterling Group around transparency, outside audits, and independent oversight. Reporters called it a strategic move. Investors called it stabilizing. Ethan, who had seen her sitting barefoot at a rented dining table at 2 in the morning, sorting forged documents with red eyes and shaking hands, knew it was something quieter and harder, surrendering the kind of power that had kept her lonely. Vivienne no longer wanted to be untouchable. She wanted to be honest. That change frightened her more than any boardroom had. Rosalind Sterling changed too, though hers was not the kind of change that made newspapers. She moved out of the Boston house she had shared with Grant and took a small apartment near Camden Harbor. She did not ask Ethan for forgiveness. She did not ask Nora to call her grandmother. She came when invited, left when asked, and answered questions without smoothing the edges. When Nora asked why she had never met Clara, Rosalind sat very still at the kitchen table, folded her hands and said, "Because when I was young, I was afraid, and I let other people decide what love was allowed to cost." Nora had frowned at that, not fully understanding. Ethan had nearly interrupted, ready to soften the words, but Rosalind shook her head once. "I made a choice I have regretted every day," she continued. "Your mother deserved better. You deserved the truth." Nora had looked down at her drawing, then back at Rosalind. "Did you love her?" Rosalind's face broke open. "Yes. I loved her before I knew how to be brave." Nora considered this for a long time. "Daddy says people can learn." Rosalind nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "I hope he is right." Nora pushed a green pencil across the table. "You can color the trees." That was how healing began in Ethan's house, not with declarations, but with colored pencils, small permissions, and people who stayed after shame told them to run. Spring arrived slowly in Camden. The snow disappeared from the gravel path behind the cottage. Crocuses pushed up beside the porch steps. The harbor turned from iron to silver, and gulls returned to the wharf with the confidence of creatures who had never doubted the world would keep spinning. Nora went back to school with a new pickup list, a private security plan Vivienne insisted on paying for, and a counselor Ethan chose carefully after interviewing 3 of them like suspects. She still had nightmares sometimes. She still asked whether the woman in the beige coat would come back. But she also drew more maps than ever. Houses with roads, islands with bridges, harbors with safe docks. One map she taped above her desk showed 3 houses connected by dotted lines: Ethan's cottage, Vivienne's rented house, and Rosalind's apartment. At the top, in careful purple letters, she wrote, "The road back." Ethan stood in her doorway the night he saw it and had to look away. He had spent so long thinking family was the shape left after loss. Nora was teaching him it could also be something built afterward. Vivienne came to Camden every weekend now, though she always asked before entering the rhythm of Ethan's home. Sometimes she brought groceries and pretended she had not overpaid for strawberries in Boston. Sometimes she helped Nora with homework, though she was terrible at elementary school fractions and excellent at teaching negotiation. Sometimes she sat on the porch with Ethan after Nora went to bed, both of them listening to the water in a silence that no longer felt empty. Neither of them spoke easily about what was forming between them. Clara was too present for carelessness. Grief had made Ethan wary of beginnings, and guilt had made Vivienne afraid of wanting anything that might look like taking her sister's place. So they moved slowly, honestly. Some nights they talked about Clara. Vivienne asked what her laugh sounded like. Ethan described it. Vivienne asked if Clara had been angry about being adopted. Ethan said sometimes, but more often she had been curious. Vivienne asked if Clara would hate Rosalind. Ethan answered after a long pause. No. Clara hated wasted time more than people. Vivienne cried then, quietly facing the harbor so he would not have to watch. Ethan stayed beside her until the crying passed. He did not touch her at first. Then, when she reached blindly for his hand, he gave it. Love, he was beginning to understand, did not erase old love. It made room beside it. The climax came not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but on a Sunday morning in Rockland. Nora had asked for weeks to see the house from her mother's stories, the gray porch, the spruce tree, the long drive down to the rocks. Rosalind found the current owner through old property records and wrote a letter. To everyone's surprise, the owner agreed to let them visit. So they drove in 2 cars along the coast, Ethan and Nora in the front, Vivienne and Rosalind behind them. The sky was pale, the road wet from overnight rain, and Nora held her map in both hands like a sacred document. When they turned onto the gravel drive, Rosalind made a small sound in the back seat of Vivienne's car. The house was still there. Smaller than memory, weathered by time, but unmistakable. Gray porch, south side spruce, long slope toward the rocks. Nora climbed out slowly, looking from the house to her drawing and back again. "Mama was right," she whispered. Ethan stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. She was. Rosalind approached the porch as if walking toward a grave. Vivienne stayed beside Ethan, her face pale with awe and sorrow. The current owner, a kind older man, let them stand in the yard as long as they wanted. Nora walked to the spruce tree and touched the bark. "Did Grandma Rose play here?" she asked. Rosalind nodded. "Yes. Did my mom ever come here?" The question opened the wound one final time. Rosalind closed her eyes. "No." Nora looked toward the house, then back at Rosalind. "Then we came for her." No one spoke. There are sentences children say without knowing they have just forgiven more than adults know how to ask. Rosalind covered her mouth. Vivienne turned away, crying openly now. Ethan knelt beside Nora and pulled her gently into his arms. For the first time, the hidden story had reached its rightful place. Clara had not lived to find the house, but her daughter had carried her there. The map was complete. Afterward, they walked down to the rocks. The ocean struck the shore in slow, white bursts. Nora collected 3 smooth stones, one for herself, one for Clara, one for the family we're still building. She gave the last one to Vivienne, who held it as carefully as if it were glass. That evening, back at Ethan's cottage, they placed the stones on the workshop shelf beside 2 framed photographs. One was Clara, laughing, wind in her hair. The other was newer Nora and Vivienne sitting side by side on the Camden Wharf, both looking toward the water, both wearing the same thoughtful expression around the mouth. Rosalind stood before the shelf for a long time. "She should have been here," she said. Ethan nodded. "Yes, I am sorry." It was not the first apology, but it was the simplest and perhaps the truest. Ethan looked at Clara's photograph. He had imagined this moment many times with anger. He had imagined accusing Rosalind, demanding answers, making her carry every year she had missed. But standing there now with Nora laughing outside and Vivienne washing dinner plates in the kitchen, he felt the anger loosen its grip. Not disappear, not excuse, simply make room for something else. "I can't give you Clara," he said. Rosalind's eyes filled. "I know, but I won't keep Nora from knowing you, as long as you keep telling her the truth." Rosalind bowed her head. "I will." That was the closest thing to reconciliation Ethan could offer, and it was enough for that day. Later, after Rosalind left and Nora fell asleep with the Rockland map beside her pillow, Ethan found Vivienne on the porch. The harbor was dark, the air soft with early summer coming. She stood with the stone Nora had given her closed in one hand. "I keep thinking I gained a sister and lost her in the same breath," she said. Ethan leaned against the rail beside her. "That's how it feels. And Nora gained a road back." Vivienne looked at him. "And you?" Ethan watched the moonlight move across the water. He thought of the town car, the photograph on the floor mat, the first terrible moment of recognition. He thought of the man he had been then, silent, hidden, convinced that protecting Nora meant keeping the world small. He had been wrong. Protection was not the same as isolation. Love was not a locked door. Family was not only what survived tragedy, but what people chose to rebuild from its ruins. "I think," he said slowly, "I stopped being afraid of letting life get bigger again." Vivienne's hand rested on the porch rail beside his. This time Ethan closed the distance. Their fingers touched, then held. It was not a replacement for Clara. It was not an ending to grief. It was a beginning made carefully in the presence of everything that had been lost. Inside the house, Nora's drawings covered the refrigerator islands, houses, roads, bridges, and one crooked heart drawn over a gray porch with a spruce tree on the south side. Ethan looked through the window at them and understood the message his daughter had been drawing all along. The truth had hurt them. It had exposed betrayal, reopened grief, and forced every adult to face the cost of silence. But truth had also returned a stolen inheritance, brought a grandmother to a child, gave Vivienne the sister she never knew enough to mourn, and allowed Ethan to stop hiding behind the wheel of someone else's life. The past could not be changed. Clara would not come back. The lost years would remain lost. But love, when chosen bravely, could still travel backward through memory and forward into the lives left behind. It could turn a secret into a bridge, a wound into a road, and a broken family into something unfinished but real. On Sunday morning, they made pancakes. Nora declared that everyone had to draw with syrup. Rosalind's heart looked like a leaf. Vivienne's looked like a corporate logo, which made Nora laugh until she nearly fell off her chair. Ethan made one that collapsed into a puddle, and Nora patted his arm with grave sympathy. "It's okay, Daddy, you're still learning." He smiled across the table at the people gathered there, his daughter, his wife's mother, his wife's sister, and the quiet space where Clara's memory sat not as an absence, but as the reason they had found one another. "Yes," Ethan said, "I am." Outside the harbor shone under the morning sun. The world remained complicated, unfair, and full of things that could be stolen or hidden or lost. But inside that small cottage, something had changed. A single father had learned that protecting his child meant letting her inherit not just money, but truth. A powerful woman had learned that strength without tenderness was just another kind of loneliness. A mother had learned that regret could not rewrite the past, but honesty could still bless the future. And a little girl with colored pencils had taught them all that family was not only the road you came from. Sometimes family was the road you chose to build together, one brave step, one honest word, and one act of love at a time.